If there's one thing I know about the algorithm, it loves a good YouTuber on YouTuber war, so let's go. Alright, Punters Politics recently made a video about Coles and Woolies ripping us off.
Oi punters, it's no secret. Coles and Woolies are ripping you off and they're ripping me off. So why the bloody hell are we still shopping there?
The short answer is probably because they've got things you want at a price you're willing to pay. The long answer is in the rest of this video. Punters Politics is a great YouTuber that makes videos about politics aimed at the average Aussie punter. His heart's in the right place, but I think he's got this one wrong, or some of it at least. He's attributing bad intent and collusion where he should see self-interest and a free market. And if self-interest is bad, we're all fucked. So let's see what he has to say about two of Australia's strongest brands.
We're forced to shop at Coles and Woolies, but I'll tell you one thing, we Aussie punters are not happy about it. Take a look at this. Here is a list of Australia's most distrusted brands this year/last year.
Okay, trust is not a proxy for satisfaction, the same way brand strength doesn't mean people love the brand. I don't trust Coles or Woolies or any other company, but I'll happily shop there.
And then we've got Coles and Woolies. I'd have thought Woolworths is more trustworthy than Coles, but no. And it looks like Aldi right in there, ready to take. Most trusted supermarket in Australia is Aldi. I vouch for Aldi, definitely. Except the problem with Aldi, everybody, is it doesn't have everything you need. That's the problem.
Aldi doesn't have everything? Well, thank God there's Coolies to supply all your needs.
We're clearly still shopping at Coles and Woolies because a lot of suburbs, a lot of areas do not have a choice. Depending on the suburb you live, you might have to go 20 minutes, 30 minutes to go find something other than a Coles or a Woolworths.
If you would have to drive 20 minutes to get to another type of store, aren't you glad that Coolies is nearby and supplying your needs? I know what you're thinking. If Coolies wasn't there, then IGA or Aldi could move in, but then you complain about the higher prices or lack of selection.
Then there is no pleasing you.
Now, why the bloody hell don't we trust Coles and Woolies? What's going on here? Well, I'll read some headlines, you decide. Coles underpays 7,800 employees, more than $115 million. Coles call it underpaying, we all call it theft.
100% agree with Punters Politics here. Theft is theft. Stop with the PR spin, Coles, you're not fooling anybody. There might be some nuance here because Coles stuffed up their calculations and didn't pay the full amount. If that's their defense, then consider trying it yourself next time you're at Coles. See if stuffing up the calculation is an acceptable excuse. But I'm not buying this bullshit, and neither is Punters Politics.
Woolworths not to be outdone. Woolworths' wage theft scandal blows out to at least $571 million with new payroll errors. Woolworths calls it payroll errors. Was anyone overpaid? Probably not. Just everyone underpaid.
Another good point by Punters Politics. Alright, credit where credit is due. This is just PR spin. Nobody was overpaid. There was no bank error in your favour, okay? That doesn't happen.
Groceries cost the same at Coles and Woolies. Farmers say they're not trying to compete. If Mr. Woolworths was to call Mr. Coles and say, hey, how much are you selling bread for? $3? Yeah, I'll sell it at the same. Thanks, mate. Bye. That would be illegal. That would be called price fixing.
Okay, I have a problem with this one. He's alleging price fixing when really it's a simple supply and demand. We would expect to see the price of bread at basically the same price at all major food outlets. I recognise that bread is just a proxy for any old staple good, but we'll stick with it. Here I am at Coles, and look, they sell bread for $2.90, $3.90, $4.40 and $4.90. And here's Woolies and Aldi and IGA. They're all pretty much the same, but it's not price fixing. It's the simple fact that if one place sold Wonder White for $5 and the other place sold it for $4, you'd buy the bread for $4 because they're identical products. And so all companies end up selling similar products for similar prices. And as there are so many substitutes for bread, the price is extremely elastic. Availability of substitutes is the fundamental determinant of elasticity of demand. The price similarities aren't from collusion, they're from basic economics. Similar products in a competitive market have similar prices.
But no, if Mr. Coles just looks over the fence at Mr. Woolworths' bread, goes, $3. And then Mr. Woolworths looks back over and goes, $3? Yeah, this is for $3. And then what do you know? The prices are roughly the same. If they're not competing on price, prices can either stay the same or slowly ratchet up because they both have an unwritten agreement that, hey, we can both benefit if we just don't have these little price wars.
They can also drift down, as all products have. Most things are cheaper now than they were 100 years ago, or 20 years ago, and even 5 years ago. No, the prices have gone up. Yep, that's inflation. As a proportion of your income, they have gone down. The way this is typically demonstrated is by looking at how many hours you had to work in order to afford the thing. So, in 1950, it took the average worker 53 minutes to buy a loaf of bread. In 2000, it was 15 minutes. In 2020, it took 9 minutes. If you want to fact check this, go to the Daily Care History of Wages section, then compare the prices of a loaf of bread with the median or average income of that time to calculate how many hours a person had to work to afford the thing.
They have been price gouging. That's when corporations use their disproportionate market power to ratchet up prices on things we need to make exorbitant profits. Not because they're innovating, not because they're providing us with an added value of service. No, just because we need what they have and they have it. And turns out when there's no competition, you can charge what you want.
Wrong again. You can't just charge whatever you want. Prices aren't a one-sided equation. They're determined by both supplier and consumer. If it was a one-sided equation, why aren't they charging $1 million for a loaf of bread? Because you wouldn't pay it. For some reason, people think these rules don't apply when discussing monopolies or duopolies, but they do. Here's how it works. Under a hypothetical monopoly, the marginal revenue curve is half the base of the demand curve. We introduce the marginal cost curve. The quantity supplied will be where marginal cost intersects with marginal revenue. In this example, it's 80 million units. What will the price be? Go straight up from quantity until we hit the demand curve, and there we have our price, $12.50. Now, if we add in the average cost curve, we can subtract costs from revenue to calculate profit. So $12.50 minus $2.50 equals $10 per unit. Times that by 80 million and you get 800 million. I can hear you thinking, 800 million in profit, that's so much. Sure, but let me bring in another key concept that I briefly mentioned before, elasticity of demand. This determines the markup a monopoly can charge. On the right, we have a graph showing inelastic demand. Notice how steep the curve is. On the left, we have a more elastic demand curve, which is flatter. The key takeaway is the steeper inelastic demand curve allows for a higher markup. However, for products like bread, which have many substitutes, the demand is more elastic, and that means a smaller markup. In the case of bread, it's so elastic that it's actually known as a loss leader. This is a pricing strategy where big stores sell items at below cost to attract customers into their stores with the hopes that they'll buy other things while they're there.
What's the end result of this price gouging, you might ask? Well, you get something called crisis profits. Oxfam did this report here. I've mentioned it in another video. But let's take a look at Woolworths profits in 2022, crisis profits. Now we'll get to the definition in a second, but they made $5.64 billion in 2022.
That's a bit misleading. He says Woolworths made $5.64 billion in 2022. But if you check the Woolworths 2022 annual report, that number doesn't show up anywhere. So I reached out to Lucy Brown, the author of the Oxfam report, to clarify. Here's her response. Feel free to pause the video if you want to read it. Shout out to Lucy B from Oxfam. Now, profit is a pretty straightforward calculation. It's just revenue minus costs, or in simpler terms, how much money came in versus how much went out. So let's take a look at Woolworths' actual profits in 2022. We're looking at the Woolworths Holdings Limited annual results for 2022. Since Woolworths is a South African company, the numbers are in South African rand. I'll convert them to Australian dollars using the conversion rate at the time of the report. First, turnover, that's our revenue. We can either consider the entire Woolworths group or just focus on the food section. I'll go through both to avoid any doubts or accusations of cherry picking. Next, we have cost of sales, our costs. When we subtract that from revenue, we get gross profit. But we also need to account for depreciation and amortization and exclude taxes and interest on debt. After running those calculations, we get this figure. EBIT, or earnings before interest and tax, shows the company's operating profit, what they make before accounting for taxes and interest on debt. In percentage terms, that's 8.69%, but if you factor in taxes and interest, it comes down to 6.1%. So for every $100 you spend at Woolworths, they're making about $6. Now, this margin is a bit higher than their usual 2%, but it's nowhere near the 20% profit margin that people often assume big corporations are pulling in.
But crisis profits, what are crisis profits? Well, this Oxfam report took 4 years of average business profits and then said, we will count something as a crisis profit if it exceeds 20% above their normal profits. Now, I don't know about you, punters, but if my profits increase 15 to 20%, Bloody hell, that's a great year. They're doing really well. So they're counting crisis profits above and beyond their 20% boost that they got thanks to everyone suffering in the entire world and all these businesses shutting down and people not being able to go out to eat, etc., etc. Coles and Woolies were there to just rake it all in.
Now, I could be wrong about this, but if we calculate the profit margin for these years, we get these numbers. If we average them out and add 20%, then we get 3.288. 20% above normal profits doesn't mean Woolworths made $20 for every $100 you spent. It means they made 20% more than normal, which turns out to be the difference between 2.74 and 3.288. Now, if I've got that wrong, let me know and I will issue a correction and pin a comment at the top saying I got it wrong. And if you're mad at the government for shutting down all other businesses, then be mad at the government. Coles and Woolies don't have that kind of authority. And as a point of clarification, Aldi and IGA were allowed to operate during that time. So again, not a duopoly.
So that's why we punters as customers are a bit pissed off with Coles and Woolies and don't trust them anymore. But what about farmers? I made an Instagram reel about this here. Now let's watch.
Oi, g'day, mate. Hello. Yeah, mate, all 10,000 bunches back there, all in Woolies packaging, ready to go for you, mate. Great news. Yep. About the price you recommended. Yep. Due to market conditions, variations, we would like to purchase half your stock for this amount. Mate, you're fair dinkum. Mate, this doesn't even cover me costs. Hang on, half. The agreement we had. Supply agreement. It's not technically a contract yet.
So this bloke is given an agreement to supply a certain amount. He goes away, farms it for months, expecting a certain price, puts up all the money in up front, then packages it, then comes to deliver it. And Coles and Woolies, because it's just an agreement, it's not a contract, they can change the price on the spot. Farmers are price takers because who else is this farmer going to sell all that produce to?
Now, if this is true, and I have no reason to doubt it, I totally agree with him. Farmers are getting screwed. I think farmers should have a signed contract instead of this verbal agreement shenanigans.
So why don't farmers complain about this? Why don't they take it to someone, report it to somebody and complain? Well, here's the answer to that question. Farmers and suppliers fear retribution by supermarkets if they complain. So these supermarkets hold so much power, they can literally say, oh, you don't like it? That's fine. You can go somewhere else. And you are out in the cold with nowhere else to go. No money. Your farm is broke.
The thing that Punters Politics is touching on here has a technical name. It's called a monopsony. Monopoly is where there is one seller and many buyers, and monopsony is where there is one buyer and many sellers. An example would be like a one-factory town, and that factory is the only employer. Workers have no other options and must accept lower wages, which is pretty similar to what we're describing here.
Here's why Australia's economy sucks on every metric. Between Coles and Woolies, they both control 65% of Australia's grocery market. Aldi is just 10%. Independents IGA have the rest. So let's compare to another country. In the UK, you have 5 major chains vying for the cut. We have 2. When you have competition, you have to compete on price, on service, on product, on quality, on innovating your business so it's better than someone else's. Australia, Coles and Woolies in Australia do not have that mechanism. It's called this weird thing. It's called a free market. We don't have that. We have an oligopoly.
Yeah, that's not true. Australia's economy is one of the best by every metric. We have a freer market than the UK, and the fact that they have 5 big supermarket chains and we have 2 could have something to do with the fact that they have a population of 66 million in the space of Victoria. Supplying a country like Australia that has a third of the population across a landmass that is 32 times bigger comes with some supply chain issues that are just not easy to overcome. I'll chalk this one up to hyperbole, but just in case, no, it's not an oligopoly. Australia has one of the freest markets in the world. In fact, we rank 8th on the Cato Freedom Index, which is freer than the UK at number 9.
So what else are they doing? We've mentioned it before. They're squeezing farmers. Let's go to the big one. They're matching prices. We mentioned that. They monitor each other's pricing closely. And if one person's prices changes, the other follows suit. This is called price fixing generally.
Again, we expect competitors to keep track of each other's prices. That's the price information they need in order to compete. You're attributing corporate conspiracy where it's just regular old competition, which entails knowing your competitors' prices. Otherwise, you'll be left standing at the counter going, where is everybody? They're all down the road shopping at the other place because it's cheaper.
Coles and Woolies are literally a middleman that sits there that goes farmer, person, and they're the one getting all the money. Middleman capitalism, that's what we've got. And their profit margin is 5 to 6%. Now the question is that too high? Well, let's take a look at some other countries to work out if it is. Thanks to this graph from the Australian Institute, we can see the US and the UK, Tesco, Sainsbury, their grocery market profit margins do not exceed 4.5%, 4.2, 3.8, 3.2. They have more competition. These are good margins. These are billion-dollar companies in other countries, and that's their margins they're working with. You look at Coles at 4.8, and then you look at Woolworths at 6. Once again, back to this graph here. We still trust Coles less than Woolworths when, by all metrics, it really looks like Woolies is the one we really shouldn't trust. This is really wrecking us here. So 6% is almost double some of these other supermarket chains, Kroger's, Sainsbury's, almost double. So when you put it into context like that, Australia has a distorted market.
Here's the big one. Punters Politics is regularly intimating to our free market as being a bad thing. He seems skeptical at least, and he's using this graph as evidence. But if he was less facetious about the free market and took the time to study economics, he would know that this was part of a natural and expected cycle. You see, at the moment, the market price is such that a firm like Woolworths is making above normal economic profits. Normal economic profits is when a firm's total revenue is exactly equal to its total costs, including both explicit and implicit costs. This means the firm is covering all of its operating costs and also earning enough to compensate for the opportunity cost of its resources, but it's not generating any additional surplus or economic profit. Economic profit is not to be confused with accounting profit. A little side note, this is why you can be suspicious of anybody that claims to be a not-for-profit. They're also not for loss either. All you need to do in order to make zero profit is bump up the salary of your CEO until there is nothing left, and then you've made no profit. Cheeky trick. Now, what happens when companies make above normal economic profits? Entrepreneurs see the opportunity to get a share of that profit and they move into the market. Supply goes up, prices and profits come down, and economic profits return to zero. It doesn't happen overnight, but it will happen. And it's no reason to doubt the successful nature of a free market.
No, they're getting these margins because they are a monopoly.
Again, not a monopoly.
So what do? Well, the government looks at the issue, goes, that looks like something really important that we should do something about. Let's kick the can down the road and hold an inquiry. An inquiry is just the government pretending to do something whilst doing nothing.
I agree. Inquiries are just the government pretending to do something and not actually doing anything. I fully expect nothing to change at all. And I think it's bullshit if politicians can just lie to us, do a little song and dance, and wait for us to forget about it. And he goes on to talk about the CEO, and if you're interested, head over to his channel and give him a sub. But let's wrap up with the bigger picture. The main point of this video isn't to paint Coles and Woolies as heroes, but to show that they're not villains either. They're just acting in their own self-interest like any business would. What Punters Politics is calling price fixing or price gouging is just supply and demand in action. But when they cross the line, like when they literally rob people, they should be hit with a fine so severe that they won't dare try it again. Now, are they monopolies? No. They control a big share of the market, but that doesn't make them invincible. If they had true monopoly power, why aren't their prices as high as IGA's? That said, some monopolies can be harmful, especially legal ones where the government gives a company an unfair advantage, like what happened in 2022. The worst part is when big corporations lobby politicians to keep these advantages, creating barriers for smaller competitors. That's where the real issue lies. Not with the companies acting in self-interest, but with politicians who let it happen. Political parties that support free markets are here, and parties that oppose free markets and want more government regulations on business are here. As you can tell, my bias is towards free markets. I think they're good. If you think otherwise, then tell me what makes you skeptical, and I'll try to answer it in the comments. This video was sponsored by Woolworths, where the prices are down and staying down. Wait, fucked it up. Nah, this video is not sponsored, but it is dedicated to all the small business owners out there that are competing with the corporate giants. I have a huge amount of respect for anyone that runs their own business. Remember, you were born free.
Politicians play the game. That's why I am for policy over parties.